his first college action to send us to overtime. It's blocked! It is blocked! It is blocked!
Man, what a week for college football. From 1-point wins to 60-point games to blunders left and right. This is one of the greatest first weeks or craziest first weeks that I've ever seen, and you guys have probably ever seen. And we just watched one tonight. Florida State up by 2 touchdowns, lets LSU march right down the field, score a touchdown, and then they force Florida State to punt. Florida State punts, Neighbors muffs the punt, Florida State has it at like their 2-yard line, and then they pitch it. They fumble, LSU gets the fumble, goes right down the field, scores a touchdown with 1 second left, and the field goal is blocked. That's the second block kick in the game. Absolutely insane. I have a feeling this season is going to be amazing, beginning to the very end. Now we're going to get right into the video. I'm going to show you guys my week 1 top 25. Then we're going to talk about each team that I have in the top 25, and I'm going to look back at their previous games, see how they did, and without further ado, let's get into it. Alright guys, so here's my top 25, and before we get into it, I'm going to have some honorable mentions at the end. And my honorable mentions are Florida State. They're 2-0, they just beat LSU, they won their first game, and they're kind of sitting right on the cusp. So is Pitt for me. Pitt's also sitting on the cusp. They just didn't look that good in that game. I don't think they should be ranked yet. But we're going to start at the top with Alabama. I have Alabama number 1. They beat Utah State 55-0. Nothing really to say about this game. It was obviously very one-sided. Utah State is a horrible team, and Alabama's obviously not. But looking at the stats, we got Bryce Young. He was 18 for 28, 195 yards, 5 touchdowns. He didn't really even need to try. Jahmyr Gibbs running the ball. He had 9 carries, 93 yards. And then they had Trayshawn Holden. He had the most receptions, 5 receptions, 70 yards. And then on the other side, we got Logan Bonner. He was 3 for 9, 39 yards for Utah State. Then they have Robert Briggs running the ball. He had 10 carries, 28 yards. And their lead receiver had 2 receptions, 33 yards. Alabama was absolutely dominant the entire game. There's really not much to say other than, again, the second team. And my second team is the Georgia Bulldogs. They played Oregon. I had Oregon at my 14th spot starting the season, and I had Georgia at my 3 spot, but obviously I moved that around. Georgia won this game 48-3, and it wasn't even close. Even from the first kickoff, Oregon was able to get down the field and move the ball on Georgia. They weren't like completely dominant, but it was kind of like a bend don't break thing. But they still didn't let them score any touchdowns. Bo Nix made a lot of mistakes, and he is 0-4 against Georgia. And what's crazy about this game, Georgia scored on their first 7 drives, all touchdowns. Stetson Bennett looked great. He was throwing the ball around, and this man was 25 for 31, 368 yards and 2 touchdowns, compared to Bo Nix, and he was 21 for 37, 173 yards, 2 interceptions. Georgia just absolutely dominated Oregon every shape and way possible, and they did throwing the ball. They didn't even run the ball necessarily well, which is kind of odd. I didn't think that Stetson Bennett would be putting up near 400-yard passing games, but if they're going to do that, then they'll probably end up repeating as national champions, because I don't think Alabama's going to be able to beat them. Even though I think Oregon is a little overrated, I wouldn't have put them like near the top 10 at all. That's why I had them middle of the pack, even further down, because on defense, all they really have are those 2 linebackers, and they didn't even play well. But as much as I think that Oregon was overrated, I also think that Notre Dame was overrated, and that was Ohio State's opponent. Ohio State beat them 21-10. They did not look like themselves on offense, and that's expected. I said this in a previous video. Ohio State never looks like their true potential at the beginning of the season. Look back at last year, lost to Oregon. Look back to years before. We always played down to our opponents, especially at the beginning of the season. And even when Ohio State won a national championship in 2015, they lost to Virginia Tech the second week of the year. And then they came out and played like the best team anyone's ever seen at the end of the year, smacked Alabama, then smacked Oregon in the national championship. Like, no one saw that coming. But the best receiver in the country did get hurt in that first quarter, and he really didn't play this game. That was definitely a big factor. They didn't have Julian Fleming as well, and I believe all that clustered together, they were just out of sync. I don't really think Notre Dame's defense is that good. I just think Ohio State's offense was out of sync. But the one bright thing, their defense is real. Ohio State seems to have fixed a little bit of those defensive issues now. Notre Dame isn't a crazy offensive team, don't get me wrong. long, but only 10 points, and they only had 2 positive drives that entire game. If this was last year, Notre Dame would have at least scored 27. So I have to give credit to Jim Knowles. I think Ohio State's defense is going to keep getting better this season. I do think their offense is also going to get better, so I'm going to keep them in the top 3 as long as they keep winning. Then looking at the stats, Tyler Buckner, he was 10 for 18, 177 yards. Honestly, most of those yards came on that first throw at the beginning of the game. That was like a 70-yard pass completion, so it's a little deceiving. CJ Stroud, 24 for 34, 223 yards, 2 touchdowns. I mean, he didn't play bad. It was kind of a pedestrian game, but I really don't think it's going to hurt his Heisman odds. He didn't throw any interceptions, and he had a good completion ratio. And then for rushing, we had Mayan Williams. He was 14 carries for 84 yards, and then Travion Henderson, he was 15 carries, 91 yards. Then looking at Tyree for Notre Dame, he had 6 rushes, 28 yards. He was their leading rusher. Then receiving, we had Emeka Egbuka. He had 9 receptions, 90 yards, and a touchdown. Then on Notre Dame side, they really didn't have anyone in particular that had a positive impact. Michael Mayer, their tight end, only had 5 receptions for 32 yards, and I guess Styles, he had that 1 reception for 54 yards at the beginning of the game that got them down there. Overall, it was a very complete game on the defensive side of the ball on both sides. They both played really good defense. Offenses were mediocre. And that kind of brings me to who I have ranked 4. I have Clemson still sitting at 4. I do expect them to beat Georgia Tech, obviously. I'm making this video before that game. And I do think Clemson is going to have the best defense over Georgia's this year, but their offense might be terrible, which is why I have them below Alabama, Georgia, and Ohio State. We're just going to have to see come Monday night. Then we have Michigan sitting at 5. They played Colorado State and they won that game 51-7. Not really much to talk about in this game. Clay Millen was 16 for 20, 137 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception passing for Colorado State. And then Cade McNamara, he had 9 completions for 18 attempts, 136 yards, 1 touchdown. And he didn't look particularly well. I guess the one thing we did learn is that Cade McNamara is not going to be the starter going forward. It's probably going to be J.J. McCarthy. So that's all I really learned about this game. And I know a lot of people are going to be wondering why I put Michigan ahead of Texas A&M. It's not that I think Michigan is more talented than Texas A&M, but Texas A&M's offense is god-awful. Their defense is great. They play really great in their game, but their offense is just atrocious. They won 31-0 against Sam Houston State, which is an FCS school. But Haynes King, he was 20 for 31. He had 364 yards. That's a lot. He had 3 touchdowns, but he had 2 interceptions. And if they're not going to be able to score at least 40-plus points on an FCS school, they're not going to be that good this year. And I just think Michigan's going to be better than that. They probably should have won their game like the team I have after won their game, and that's Baylor. I have Baylor sitting at the 7th spot. They beat Albany 69-10. And that's why I'm expecting Texas A&M to score. Not like 69, but at least get into the 50s. Like if it was 56-7 or something like that, then it would be a different story. But for Baylor, Blake Shapen, he looked good. I know it's Albany, but all you can do is beat the opponents that are given to you. And he was 17 for 20, 214 yards. He had 2 touchdowns. And the running back, Richard Reese, he had 9 carries, 62 yards. And their leading receiver, Myrie Baldwin, he had 4 receptions for 84 yards. And if you guys want my honest opinion, I think Baylor versus Texas A&M would be a solid game, to be honest. Maybe they'll beat in the bowl season when it comes, and Texas A&M is 8-4 and Baylor's 9-3 or something. But after that, I have Oklahoma sitting at the 8th spot. They played UTEP, and they won that game 45-13. Dylan Gabriel looked okay. He was 15 for 23, 233 yards, 2 touchdowns. Eric Gray ran the ball particularly well. He had 16 carries, 102 yards. But that was more the bulk of their offense. They were running the ball. They weren't really throwing it around as much. And I think that's what we're going to see out of Oklahoma and Brent Venables, and that's what he wants to do. He wants to be more even instead of cater to one side like Lincoln Riley in the pass game. But nonetheless, they impressed. And then after them, I have Miami sitting at number 9. Miami won their game 70-13 against Bethune-Cookman. I think that's how you say it. And this game was just ridiculous. Tyler Van Dyke was 13 for 60, 193 yards, 2 touchdowns. I mean, it's so insane. They played the amount of quarterbacks and players that the opposing quarterback had 11 completions for 20 attempts, 243 yards. He outgained Tyler Van Dyke. And even crazier, they had 342 yards altogether. So it's not like Miami shut them down offensively. They just didn't let them score as much as the yardage shows, because Miami had 586 yards themselves. They did run the ball very well. Henry Parrish had 14 carries, 108 yards. Xavier Restrepo, I think that's how you say his name, had 5 receptions, 100 yards. But then Bethune also threw 3 interceptions in this game, which is probably a reason why Miami was able to score so much. And rounding out the top 10, I do have Notre Dame rounding out the top 10. They played very well against Ohio State. Again, I don't know if it was just Ohio Ohio State being out of it or Notre Dame actually playing good defense. They were actually very physical and they played very well defensively in this game. So I'm going to keep them in the top 10 because of their potential and how they came into Columbus and just battered and bruised Ohio State. And then after them, I have USC sitting at the 11th spot. They won their game against Rice 66-14. This game is kind of a throwaway. Caleb Williams was 19 for 22, 249 yards, 2 touchdowns. He also had 6 rushes on the ground, 68 yards. And then receiving, we got Washington. He had 4 receptions, 65 yards. Jordan Addison, he had 5 receptions, 54 yards. Mario Williams, 2 receptions, 43 yards. They were getting everyone involved. But I'm pumping the brakes on USC so far just because of their defense. I want to see them play a decent offense, or at least a half decent offense, and just see how good their defense actually is and then what the outcome of that game is. Then after USC, I got sitting at the 12th spot. I have Oklahoma State. Now Oklahoma State played Central Michigan, and oh my god, did they look bad on defense. Who knew you could miss Jim Knowles so much? Oklahoma State did win this game though, 58-44. They let Central Michigan score 22 points in the fourth quarter. And I'm going to be honest, I don't see Oklahoma State really winning that much this year. I think they're only going to win like 8 games because of that defense, and I don't think Spencer Sanders is going to be able to win those big games for Oklahoma State. I mean, looking at their passing, Sanders was 20 for 41, 406 yards, 4 touchdowns, but Daniel Richardson for Central Michigan, he was 36 for 49, 424 yards, 4 touchdowns, 1 interception. Now, I know Oklahoma State lost like their whole defense from last year, but that's no excuse to let up 44 points to Central Michigan. It just really isn't. And to let up 546 yards, they outgained Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State only had 531 yards. So I'm not that high on Oklahoma State this year. I have them sitting at 12 just because they won and the teams below them looked worse. And speaking of that, I have Utah sitting at the 13th spot. I had Utah at rank 5 and I moved them back to 8 spots because they lost by 3 points to Florida, but I do not have Florida ahead of them just because I think Utah would beat Florida on a neutral site, and I honestly do think that they are the better team. If Cameron Rising wouldn't have thrown that interception at the end of the game, I guarantee you that they would have scored a touchdown and beaten Florida. So that's kind of why I have Utah where they're at. I still think they're the best team in the Pac-12. They're better than Oregon. They're better than every other team there. I still think that they would beat USC if they played them. Now that's a hot take. That's going to be a good game if it happens. But looking at the stats of this game, Cameron Rising was 22 for 32 for 216 yards, 1 touchdown, and that interception at the end of the game that cost them. Now Anthony Richardson, he was 17 for 24, 168 yards passing. But rushing the ball, he had 11 carries, 106 yards, and 3 touchdowns. He carried the team. Just like I said before, if Florida was going to win this game, he was going to have to play like Lamar Jackson. He was going to have to carry Florida to the win. And that's exactly what he did. And then we got Tavion Thomas for Utah. He had 115 yards rushing. They couldn't really stop the guy. And then they have Brant Keith. He had 9 receptions, 105 yards. And in total, just for Utah to come down and play like they did and lose the way they did, I still think they're the better team, which is why I have them above Florida. And that's just how it is. And then looking after Utah, I have North Carolina State. They're sitting at the 14th spot after they won their game 21-20 over East Carolina, and oh my god, did they look horrible. I had North Carolina State sitting at the 9th spot, and I decided to move them all the way back to the 14th spot just because they were not supposed to win that game. East Carolina lost that game. They missed an extra point, and then they missed a field goal at the end. They lost. North Carolina State didn't win. So I'm kind of treating it as like a half loss, half win for them, which is why I have them sitting there. Devin Leary played horrible. He was 17 for 33, 211 yards. He had 1 touchdown, 1 interception, but he was very inaccurate, and they were not converting, especially on third down. They were able to run the ball a little bit, 14 carries, 79 yards, but they got outgained by 40 yards in this game. And if East Carolina didn't throw their 2 interceptions or blow those field goals, this would have been a completely different game. So I think I was a little bit wrong on North Carolina State. I think they had too much hype. I don't think they're going to be able to beat Clemson anymore. I think they're probably going to lose 4 or 5 games this year just based off of this game alone. Then after North Carolina State, I have Kentucky. I only moved Kentucky up 1 spot because they won their game 37-13 against Miami of Ohio, and they honestly didn't look good in this game either. I mean, Will Levis, he was 21 for 32. He had 303 yards, which is good. He had 3 touchdowns, 1 interception. They weren't able to run the ball at all, really. But receiving, Tavion Robinson, he had 6 receptions, 136 yards, and altogether they had 353 yards. But they let up 290 for Miami of Ohio, and honest to God, I thought Kentucky's defense was supposed to be a lot better than this. I didn't think they'd even let Miami of Ohio score. Granted, I know Miami of Ohio is supposed to be better this year than they are usually, and Kentucky was only 15.5 point favorites, which was kind of crazy to me, and they did cover, but I just expected them to do better. But then after them, I had Penn State. I did already talk about Penn State and Purdue. If you guys want to watch the video, I'm going to link it down in the description. I have them sitting at 21. They beat Purdue 35-31. And then after that, I have Wisconsin. They played Illinois State. They won that game 38-0. And like in Wisconsin fashion, their defense played amazing. Graham Mertz was 14 for 16, 219 yards, 1 touchdown. And then Braylon Allen, 14 carries, 148 yards. He is going to be insane. He's the next great running back at Wisconsin, and it's going to be really hard to stop him. And something that you're never used to when it comes to a Wisconsin game, they had a receiver catch over 106 yards in passes. 3 receptions, 106 yards, Shamir Dyke. Congratulations to that dude, because I guarantee you not one more time this year will someone go over 100 yards receiving for Wisconsin, especially with Graham Mertz. But if he can keep the mistakes down, I think Wisconsin can have a really good year. They could probably win 10 games again. Then moving on to my 18th spot, I have Arkansas. Arkansas beat Cincinnati 31-24. This was a really good game. Cincinnati's quarterback made a lot of mistakes in this game, but they fought hard. They played a lot harder in this game than they did against Alabama in the playoff last year. They stopped the run. They played hard, and I believe Cincinnati could be a good team this year. Now, Arkansas had all the advantages. They were playing at home and everything. Cincinnati basically had a brand new defense, brand new offense, brand new everything. Now, if they had the same team as last year, they would have wiped the floor with Arkansas, I believe. Just way too many missed throws by Ben Bryant. It was his first start, but he was 26-43, 325 yards. He had 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. He missed like 3 different touchdown passes. So like I said, Cincinnati would have won this game. But KJ Jefferson, he was 18 for 26, 223 yards. He had 3 touchdowns. He was a little banged up, by the way. He did run 18 times for 62 yards as well. Sanders also had 20 rushes, 117 yards. While Cincinnati's side, 12 carries, 59 yards from Corey Kiner. Wasn't all that crazy. Then coming after Arkansas, sitting at the 19th spot, I have Michigan State. Michigan State won their game 35-13. I already talked about that. They beat Western Michigan. They looked okay in this game. Nothing really crazy. Peyton Thorne was 12 for 24, 203 yards, 4 touchdowns, 1 interception. Jalen Berger at 16 carries, 120 yards. Nothing really special. It was kind of what I was expecting. Their defense did play a little bit better, so I hope Michigan State's defense, especially their pass defense, improved since last year. And finishing up the top 20, I have the Florida Garrison at 20. I already talked about them against Utah. Great win. Anthony Richardson played great. We'll see if they can keep it moving with Billy Napier. And then after them, at 21, I have the Texas Longhorns. They won their game 52-10 over Louisiana Monroe, and this was Quinn Ewers' debut. He was 16 for 24, 225 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. He really didn't look that good, I'm going to be completely honest. And then for the showdown against Alabama, Texas is going to get curb stomped. They are going to lose by a lot, and Quinn Ewers might even get hurt in this game. I hope Sark knows what he's doing and has some plays called for him like throughout the majority of this game to keep him safe, because their offensive line is really bad and Alabama's defensive line is really good. Will Anderson is going to have a field day, and I'm praying for Quinn Ewers. Then after Texas, I have BYU. BYU completely destroyed USF 50-21. Now USF has a decent team this year, especially with transfer Gary Bohannon. So for BYU to win like this, it actually means a lot. Jaron Hall was 25 for 32, 261 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. Gary Bohannon was 17 for 30, 172 with 1 interception. But Chris Brooks, man, 13 carries, 135 yards. They were running up and down on this team, and it was just ridiculous. I have high hopes for BYU this year. That was a good win for them. Then coming in at 23, I have the Oregon Ducks, and honest to God, the only reason I don't have them outside of my top 25 is because they were actually able to move the ball on Georgia, because that was just an embarrassing performance that they put out. Bo Nix looked horrible. Their defense looked horrible. They couldn't stop anything. You guys already know. And then coming at number 24, I have Ole Miss. Ole Miss did not look good in their game. I moved them back a few spots. I initially had them at 19, and I moved them all the way back to 24 because they only won 28-10 over Troy. And they let Troy total 346 yards against their 433 yards. Now, that is cause for concern for me because they don't have a good defense right now. Their defense was supposed to improve from last year's defense, and we knew their offense wasn't going to be as good with USC transfer Jackson Dart. He was 18 for 27, 154 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. He did bad. Gunnar Watson looked better. He was 34 for 47, 275 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. But the one thing Ole Miss had going for them was Zach Evans, the transfer from TCU. He had 20 carries, 130 yards. Now, he is promising, but they have to fix their offense if they're going to go anywhere. And last but not least, I have Tennessee sitting in my 25 spot. I know a lot of people don't think Tennessee deserves to be on the list. I do. They won their game against Ball State 59-10. Hendon Hooker is 18 for 25, 221 yards, 2 touchdowns. Jalen Wright ran for 88 yards. It was just a good game for them, even though they allowed 343 yards, which is a little concerning. They did have 570 yards. And I do think Tennessee is going to be a solid team this year. I did move Houston out of the top 25 because I honestly think they should have lost to UTSA. So I might move them back back in depending how things move around. But with that performance, I don't think they deserve to be in the top 25. Lastly, before I end this video, I want to talk about North Carolina for a second. They won their game 63-61 against Appalachian State, and I'm just appalled on how bad their defense is. Letting Appalachian State score 61 and 40 of that in the fourth quarter. Are you kidding me? North Carolina has one of the worst defenses I ever seen. This is like a Walmart, Oklahoma defense. Or a Walmart, Oklahoma team. I mean, their offense is okay. Drake May is actually decent. He went for 24, 36, 352 yards and 4 touchdowns. And Appalachian State had 649 yards. North Carolina only had 567. Their defense is really bad. I don't expect them to win a lot of games like this. I just wanted to talk about that because that is absolutely insane. Something's got to be done. Mac Brown's got to do something. But with that being said, that's going to be the end of the video, guys. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Leave a like and check out my Patreon in the description if you want to support me even further. But until next time, peace.